and Port Elizabeth are steeped in South African history. The Eastern Cape is also steeped in motorsport history, with the Aldo Scribante circuit on the outskirts of Port Elizabeth hosting rounds 3 and 4 of the Bankfin Touring Car Championship. The Eastern Cape is home turf for Audi, with a huge crowd turning out at Aldo Scribante for the Engine Audi race day. Conditions could not have been better on a balmy summer day, with rounds 3 and 4 of the Bankfin Touring Car Championship topping the bill. The AA Kyalami-based BP Nissan team dominated the 1997 championship, and for the first time this season were venturing into Audi territory. After the first 2 rounds at AA Kyalami, reigning champion Janelle de Villiers and teammate Duncan Foss arrived at Aldo Scribante with only 2 points separating the pair at the top of the leaderboard, with 1996 champion Terry Moss a further 3 points behind. A good grid position is a prerequisite at the tight Aldo Scribante circuit, and there was enormous interest in the 2 Bankfin qualifying sessions. Among the privateer stalwarts like Nico van Rensburg in the Hillbank Nissan Sentra and George Besaidnout in the Nissan Engine Exchange Sentra have been joined by British driver Mark Peters in the Duxbury Modems BMW. There was a little to choose between the trio in the opening qualifying session, but they found themselves a second or 2 off the pace set by Marco dos Santos in the Duckham Nissan Sentra. The Engine Audi squad were desperately keen to do well on their home circuit, but a misfire relegated local hero Terry Moss to the back of the grid. Cape Tonian Hilton Cowie and the factory Toyota team were happy with a share of the 3rd row with dos Santos, with the Sasol BMW team looking for a repeat of 1997 when Sean van der Linde took both pole positions and went on to win both races.
Yeah, last year we had a very, very successful weekend here, and we hope to do the same again this weekend. Tyre wear is going to be even more crucial this weekend than last year. There hasn't been a race here for a while, so the track's very, very abrasive. And I think we might not be able to do the fastest lap on an outright lap, but definitely over races I think we're going to be the strongest. And maybe from lap 12 to the end I think we're going to be the cars to beat, and that's going to be the most important thing.
The South African Touring Car Association has scrapped the controversial draw for grid positions among the top 8 qualifiers, and in its place has instituted weight penalties for the first 3 in qualifying.
I like this more, definitely like it more, and I think it's a bit more fair towards the guys in the cars that are quick at the moment.
Let's have a look at the grid for round 3, with Janelle de Villiers on pole and alongside him Sean van der Linde. Row 2, the BP Nissan Primera of Duncan Foss and Mike Briggs in the 2nd BMW. Row 3, privateer dos Santos and Cowie. Row 4, the Engine Audi of Chris Aberdeen and the Peters BMW. Behind them, the Besaidnout Nissan Sentra. And as the cars come up to complete their warm-up laps, it's over to Arnold Geertz.
Thank you, Ms. Pringle. And these days it's rolling starts in the Bankfin Touring Car Championship with the 2 BP Nissan Primeras on the inside of the circuit and the 2 Sasol Beamers alongside them. Race cam action from the Duncan Foss Primera. Foss was tucked in behind Janelle de Villiers on the run down to the right-hander at Luke Repko, and early drama with contact between Sean van der Linde and Duncan Foss. The BMW started to spin and was hit again by Foss, who in turn was stumped by Mike Briggs in the 2nd Sasol BMW. With 3 of the expected front runners already in big trouble, Janelle de Villiers had a clear track ahead of him, and chasing after the BP Nissan was Hilton Cowie in the Minolta Toyota Corolla. Cowie missed the first corner mayhem, and the other big winner was Terry Moss, who drove around all the trouble, and in less than half a lap, the 1996 champion had gone from the back of the grid right through to 3rd place. Another look at the first corner incident, this time from the Briggs car. Hilton Cowie starts to go around the outside as Van der Linde and Foss make contact, and after that, that's the BMW Nissan Tango. And a bit of farming thrown in too. Janelle de Villiers in front of Hilton Cowie with a sizable gap between the Minolta Toyota Corolla and Terry Moss in 3rd place. Then came Marco dos Santos, George Besaidnout, British driver Mark Peters in the Duxbury Modems BMW, and Henny Groenewald in a 3rd Engine Audi. Race cam action from the Minolta Toyota, with Cowie not letting de Villiers get away from him in the early stages of the race that had already seen plenty of drama already, thank you very much. Duncan Foss, Mike Briggs and Sean van der Linde were all running again in battered and bent machinery. The first lap incident also claiming Chris Aberdeen in the second works N-Gen Audi. Aberdeen was thumped by Marco de Santos, who was busy taking evasive action, and it was the end of the road for the unfortunate Aberdeen, who won round 2 of the Bankfin series at AA Kyalami. At the front of the field, matters were getting a little interesting, with Hilton Cowie starting to put Janelle de Villiers under a great deal of pressure. This was unfamiliar territory for Cowie, but it was a major boost for the Minolta Toyota team, and de Villiers had a real fight on his hands. Bits of bodywork were flying off the Mike Briggs car, with the BMW, the Voss Nissan Primera and Van der Linde in the second Sassel car fighting their way through a pack of privateers at the back of the field. A good scrap between George Besaidnout, Mark Peters and Henny Groenewald was developing ahead of them, but the works trio were carving through the field. Race cam action now from the Voss BP Nissan Primera as he zipped past Sagran Neer's VW Jetta at the end of the main straight. Three-time touring car champion Mike Briggs really had the hammer down in the Beamer and was following in Voss's wake. Briggs has not won since joining the Sassel BMW team, and he can't have been impressed with Nair, who tucked in behind Voss through the Conti S's. Briggs eventually forced his way through, but he had lost ground on Voss. The Marco de Santos Duckham's Nissan Sentra was showing the scars of his coming together with Aberdeen at the first corner. The Sentra was under pressure from George Besaidnout, Mark Peters and Henny Groenewald in the ex-Aberdeen Audi. Groenewald has been driving in the N-Gen Polo Classic Cup, and this was his first touring car outing since the 1996 season, and he was going very well. More race cam action, this time from the Van der Linde Sassel BMW. Privateer Brian Martin in the dealer team Toyota Corolla politely moved out of Van der Linde's way, with Sagran Nair the next target. Nair presented Mike Briggs with a few problems on the previous lap, but Van der Linde caught the VW Jetta at the start of the main straight, and it was plain sailing for him to get past the local driver. Coming up to half distance with race leader Janelle de Villiers in the BP Nissan Primera still under pressure from the Hilton Cowie Minolta Toyota Corolla. A third dimension was being added to the battle, with local hero Terry Moss in the N-Gen Audi slowly closing in on the pair ahead of him. With his legions of Eastern Cape fans urging him on, Moss had the bit between his teeth and was charging in typical fashion. Also on a charge were Sean van der Linde and Mike Briggs in the two Sassel BMWs. Van der Linde closed up on teammate Mike Briggs, who had an ominous trail of smoke streaming from the back of the Sassel car. The two former touring car champions picked off Mark Peters and George Besaidnout and were now chasing after Duncan Voss, who was also a part of the first corner menage à trois with a BMW pair. Race order was now de Villiers, Cowie and Moss, with Marco de Santos fourth. Henny Groenewald was fifth, with tyre wear on the abrasive Aldo Scribante circuit now a major factor. The cars were starting to just slide around, and with 10 laps to go, the advantages late in the race would lie with those who had done the best job of preserving rubber. The two Sassel BMWs in full flight down the main straight, with Sean van der Linde chasing after Mike Briggs. Building up to well over 200 k's an hour before braking for Luke Repko. And would you believe it, Sean van der Linde locked up the brakes and ran Briggs right up the backside. However, you don't want to know what Mike Briggs was saying as he sat in the stricken Beamer, and you can bet there was also a fair bit of consternation in the BMW pits. Tension was also mounting in the Nissan, Toyota and Audi pits, with a three-way battle between de Villiers, Cowie and Moss still raging on. Fourth place, Marco de Santos was starting to struggle just a little in the Duckham's Nissan Sentra and had Henny Groenewald closing in on him. Duncan Voss was still making progress through the field, with a Besaidnout Peters scrap an ongoing affair. Behind them, Van der Linde was soldiering on in the remaining factory Sassel BMW, with privateer Nico van Rensburg quietly going about his business in the Hillbank Nissan Sentra. This was the battle up front, with Janelle de Villiers still unable to shake off Hilton Cowie. Stalking the pair was local favourite Terry Moss, who still had a little work to do if he was going to get to grips with the Nissan Primera and the Toyota Corolla. Cowie was one of a brat pack a decade ago that included Mike Briggs and Chris Aberdeen, with a Cape Townian spending a couple of seasons in Formula 2 in Britain. The Toyota team has not had much to shout about over the last 2 seasons, and this was by far Cowie's best performance in the Bankfin Touring Car Championship. The Minolta Toyota squad is waiting for new engines and gearboxes to arrive from the United Kingdom, but on the tight Scribante layout, where sheer horsepower is not the factor it is at tracks like AA Kyalami and Goldfields, the Corolla was managing to stay with the BP Nissan Primera quite comfortably. Terry Moss working hard and coming back from 11th on the grid, but was it enough? That's what Sean van der Linde was saying. It had been an adventurous outing for Sean and a double winner at Scribante last season, but there was more to come. Just sit tight, because when George Besaidnout got just a nudge from Mark Peters on the way down to the Firehawk sweep, van der Linde had to take to the dirt in some hasty evasive action, with the Sassel BMW by now distinctly the worse for wear. It looks a little bit like a rally car from here. A bad day at the office, it's probably the best description for Van der Linde's race day. It was turning into a pretty good day at the office for this trio. Reigning champion Gilles de Villiers continued to lead Hilton Cowie and Terry Moss, with the BP Nissan Primera gradually starting to edge away from the Minolta Toyota Corolla. With the race now into its closing stages, this was the critical period for tyre wear, and it was Cowie who looked to be suffering a little more than both de Villiers and Moss. Cowie was slowly losing ground to de Villiers, and the gap between the Toyota and the Audi was getting noticeably smaller. A long way behind the trio, Duncan Foss in the second BP Nissan Primera had worked his way up to fourth. Foss had moved ahead of Marco de Santos in the Duckham's Nissan Sentra, who was the leading privateer. With the Sentra also showing signs of wear and tear, de Santos was coming under enormous pressure from Henny Groenewald in the ex-Aberdeen Audi. An aircraft delay en route to Port Elizabeth saw Groenewald miss the opening qualifying session. After a minimum of seat time in the Audi, Groenewald had settled down and was getting stronger and stronger as the race progressed. When Groenewald finally put the squeeze on at the Honda hairpin, de Santos stood his ground with plenty of physical contact between Audi and Nissan Sentra. But what's new in this race so far? The Firehawk sweeping on the run into Goodyear. It was Groenewald who always had a slight advantage, and there wasn't much a spirited de Santos could do about it. Race order going into the last couple of laps was now de Villiers, Cowie, Moss, Foss, Groenewald and de Santos. With de Villiers looking comfortable and still easing away from the Toyota Corolla, the major focus was now on the battle for second and third between Cowie and Moss. Cowie was under extreme pressure and was now having to take defensive lines through corners. The approach to the Honda hairpin provided a perfect example of a drive on the defensive, as Cowie moved right over to fend off any attack from Moss down the inside. With Cowie and Moss holding each other up, it was also giving de Villiers the opportunity to stretch his lead further. Moss's aggressive charge was warming up the locals, who were solidly behind their favourite as he continued to put the pressure on Cowie. The battle for 4th, 5th and 6th was also still on the go, with Duncan Foss looking to be in trouble in the second BP Nissan Primera. Foss was being caught hand over fist by Henny Groenewald and Marco de Santos, who both stormed past the Nissan Primera on the run down to the Firehawk sweep. The battle up front continued to provide for some nail-biting motor racing, with Terry Moss now seriously trying to find a way around Hilton Cowie. There was confirmation of Duncan Foss's demise. The second BP Nissan Primera coasted into the pits with a factory-baked contingent now down to 4 cars. The penultimate lap, with Hilton Cowie and Terry Moss still at each other's throats. It was stirring stuff, with Moss being urged on by the Aldo Scribante faithful, who over the years have taken Moss to their hearts. It was obvious that Cowie's tyres were now on their last legs, but the Cape Townian was managing to keep the MG and Audi at bay with a grandstand finish in the offing. Gilles de Villiers now had a comfortable 4-second gap between himself and the Cowie-Moss confrontation, with the reigning champion now firmly in the driver's seat and in control. Primera was still sounding good, with de Villiers, Cowie and Moss coming up to start their last lap. It was a question of now or never for Moss. Aldo Scribante is not the easiest circuit in the world when it comes to passing someone who does not want to be passed, and Moss wasn't close enough to make a move at the end of the main straight. There was a 15-second gap between Moss and Groenewald, who had a comfortable gap over de Santos, who was under threat from the Brit, Mark Peters. Moss's next opportunity to get ahead of Cowie would be under braking for the Honda hairpin. Once again, Cowie was defending the inside line for all he was worth. Moss was forced to take the long way around the hairpin, and when there was a little contact between Cowie and Moss, Cowie lost his back bumper, but the Toyota man wasn't going to be intimidated, and he stuck to his guns through the Firehawk sweep. While Cowie and Moss headed for the final corner, Marco de Santos ran into a few problems at the Honda hairpin himself. Under pressure from Mark Peters, he left his braking a fraction too late and took to the dirt. De Santos was still bundu bashing when Cowie emerged onto the main straight, still ahead of Terry Moss, with a checkered flag putting an end to hostilities. And you can bet that the boys and the crews were very happy to see the checkered flag out.
Win number 2 this season for Gilles de Villiers, and a tremendous result for Hilton Cowie and the Minolta Toyota team. A good finish too for Terry Moss from the back of the grid, and look at that, 4 privateers in the top 8.
There was a bit of chaos there in the first corner, but luckily I got through that, and Hilton Cowie in the Toyota was just behind me, so he pressed very hard, and it was a tough race up until about the 15th lap, 16th lap, where I managed to pull a little bit of a gap. I had to look after my tyres very well to stay in front right to the end, which we did, and I'm very happy with the performance of the car and the way it went throughout the race, and I'm confident for the next one.
circuit in Port Elizabeth for round 4 of the Bankfin Touring Car Championship. This time round, it's a BP Nissan 1-2 on the front row of the grid, with Duncan Foss and Janelle de Villiers, followed by the Van der Linde and Briggs Sassel BMWs. Row 3, it's Cowie and De Santos. Row 4, Aberdeen and Moss. Once again, your race commentator is Arnold Geertz.
4 of the top drivers in the Bankfin Touring Car Championship were victims of the first corner coming together in round 3, and this time it was Duncan Foss who led the charge towards Luke Repko. Race cam action from Briggs BMW, with Sean van der Linde tucked in behind Foss, with Janelle de Villiers on his outside. There might have been a little contact there, with de Villiers deciding to back off and to let van der Linde go. Discretion was the better part of valor, and through the Conti S's early race order was Foss ahead of van der Linde, de Villiers and Briggs. Then came De Santos, Cowie and the 3 engine Audis of Moss, Groenewald and Aberdeen. The braking area for the Honda hairpin, and the action was in the middle of the pack, with Moss and Cowie climbing all over De Santos. Moss had 2 wheels up on the curbs as he muscled his way alongside Cowie, who was forced out wide and up onto the curbs at the exit to the corner. Race cam action from the Minolta Toyota, with Cowie dropping back to 7th, with 2 more Audis right behind him. Through the Firehawk sweeping up to Goodyear Corner, and technical crew were in overdrive during the break between rounds 3 and 4. Aberdeen, Foss and Briggs were all round 3 casualties who were back in action. Van der Linde and Mark Peters also had their problems after round 3 and found themselves excluded from the results by the clerk of the course, Steve Harding. Van der Linde for the incident with teammate Briggs, and Peters for his part in the incident that put George Besaidnout right out of the action. We're in car now with Sean van der Linde, who's the Sassel BMW meet in the BP Nissan Primera sandwich. Through the Conti S's with race order unchanged, and so far no early incidents or casualties. It makes a nice change. A switch then to more race cam action from the Minolta Toyota Corolla, and at this stage of round 3, Hilton Cowie was challenging for the lead, and this time around found himself down in 7th place. That's how it goes in the tough school of Bankfin touring cars. Much happier scenario for the Sassel BMW squad in round 4. Between them, Sean van der Linde and Mike Briggs have won 3 touring car championships and 43 races. But round 3 developed into a race the 2 drivers and the entire Sassel BMW team will want to forget in a hurry. Now the pair were 2nd and 4th, although there were little puffs of smoke already starting to emerge from the back of the Briggs car. Aldo Scribante is also home base for Briggs, and now he must have been hoping to pick up his first win in BMW colours in front of his home crowd. No one was close enough to attack anyone at Luke Repko, and there were those telltale puffs of smoke from the Briggs car again. As always, just a little bit of wind making the flags flutter. 6 out of 20 laps gone, with the 2 BP Nissan Primeras and 2 Sassel BMWs at the front of the field, starting to open up a little gap over Marco De Santos and the rest of the pack. One got the impression that it was a waiting game up front, but the drivers content to try and conserve their tyres on that abrasive Scribante surface. Behind the front 4, it looked as though Marco De Santos had picked up a problem of some kind. The Duckham's Nissan had thus far managed to comfortably stay ahead of Terry Moss, but there was a change in race order when De Santos looked to switch into cruise mode, and the engine Audi picked up a place to move into 5th. Hilton Cowie was also closing in on De Santos, and Chris Aberdeen was another who looked to be struggling just a little. The front 4 was still running in tandem, but there were signs that Janelle de Villiers was starting to apply a little pressure on Sean van der Linde. On the tyre-wear front, 2 of the first 4 cars on the road were front-wheel driven and 2 rear-wheel driven. In theory, it was the rear-wheel drive Sassel BMWs who would be easier on the Yokohama rubber, but theory and practice are often poles apart in motor racing. With half-distance approaching, no one looked to be struggling for grip, but Marco De Santos was struggling now to keep Hilton Cowie at bay. De Santos has been a thorn in factory team flesh since the Duckham's team came into the Bankfin series last year, but Cowie was now starting to pose a threat to the young Johannesburg student. Just over half distance, and the status quo at the front of the field remained the same. Duncan Foss was still out in front of Sean van der Linde and reigning champion Janelle de Villiers. The still smoking Sassel BMW of Mike Briggs was 4th, but the signs were there that Briggs was starting to lose a little ground on the trio just ahead of him. Race cam action from the Briggs car clearly showed he was dropping back slightly from de Villiers, with everyone into that stage of the race where any tyre wear problems would start to surface and make life difficult. Too early, it appeared that Janelle de Villiers was preparing to put some pressure on Sean van der Linde. Now it looked as though van der Linde decided it was time that race leader Duncan Foss was put under a little stress. The body language from the Sassel BMW suggested that van der Linde was ready to mount a serious challenge and put the BMW in a position where they could snatch their first win of the season. Hilton Cowie in the Minolta Toyota Corolla was still chasing after Marco de Santos, with the pair gradually being reeled in by Henny Grunewald's engine Audi to make it a three-way battle. Suddenly, things were starting to happen in a race that had yet to produce any fireworks. But that sound spelled the start of the big bangs. That was a nudge from Grunewald, who clearly wanted to come through. Sean van der Linde continued to look as though he meant business, but he was still the meat in the BP Nissan Primera sandwich. There were also signs that race leader Duncan Foss was able to respond to van der Linde's pressure without having to take any undue risks. Briggs was still hanging on to the trio ahead of him, with Terry Moss lurking around in 5th place. Hilton Cowie was still chasing after Marco de Santos, but was having to withstand some serious pressure from Henny Grunewald. It all came to a head at the Honda hairpin when Grunewald went for the inside line. And there was heavy contact between the Audi and Toyota. Cowie was an instant casualty with the front suspension out of kilter completely. Not the greatest place to leave a car on the Aldo Scribante circuit, and a clearly unpleased Cowie leaving the marshals to clean up the mess. Race order was now Duncan Foss ahead of Sean van der Linde, Janelle de Villiers and Mike Briggs. They made up the first wave of cars, with Terry Moss a lonely 5th. Moss was followed by Marco de Santos and Henny Grunewald, with Chris Aberdeen in the second factory engine Audi, moving ahead of privateer Mark Peters in the Duxbury Modems BMW. Mr. Cowie had a long walk back to the pits, but bumped into an old mate along the way and looked cheerful enough. The 4 cars at the front of the field, however, were still playing follow my leader with a crowd waiting for some late race dramatics. Most of the movements through the field was coming from Henny Grunewald in the ex-Aberdeen Audi, and he picked up another place when he finally got past Marco de Santos at the Honda hairpin. But ask yourself, did you notice the yellow flags? Henny didn't, and the clerk of the course would no doubt have to take action about that. Whatever the case may have been, de Santos could not respond, with Grunewald now 6th, with the Audi outing a one-off drive for Grunewald, who was hoping to come up with enough sponsorship to run the car for the rest of the season. The laps were ticking away, but there was still no movement at the front of the field, and with the leaders streaming down the main straight towards the Luke Repco right-hander, there were no heroics from Foss, van der Linde or de Villiers, with Briggs still keeping station in 4th place. Lap 18 out of 20, with van der Linde a little sideways at the exit of the Honda hairpin. It was the first real indication that worn rubber was now turning out to be a major factor, and there was immediately a feeling that de Villiers was now going to turn the screws on Sean van der Linde. When the trio came charging into Goodyear corner, the Sassel BMW driver was being forced into taking a defensive line, and de Villiers was poised to try and make a decisive move. As the trio charged past the pits, de Villiers emerged from the BMW slipstream to draw alongside the Sassel cars. They headed for Luke Repco. Van der Linde was now trying to make the BMW as wide as possible, and Foss gave his teammate a helping hand by keeping a wide line into the right-hander. Suddenly, de Villiers had the space and the momentum to ease the BP Nissan Primera into 2nd place. Squad now had the 1-2 they wanted, and with a lap and a half to go, race leader Duncan Foss and Janelle de Villiers could dictate the tactics over the closing stages. Van der Linde was on a hiding to nothing, but the 1994 champion is a real fighter, and he was not going to throw in the towel at this late stage. A few Nissan hearts must have skipped a beat or two when they saw smoke from the front of the de Villiers car, but it was only bodywork rubbing against the left front tyre. There was more smoke from the de Villiers Nissan under-braking for Goodyear. A little earlier in the race, that might have developed into a major problem, but at this stage of proceedings, it wasn't going to slow down de Villiers at all. Terry Moss was easing in on 4th place Mike Briggs, and further back there were changes in the race order. Henny Grunewald was still going very well in 5th place, but his yellow flag indiscretion would cost him 30 seconds in penalties. Then it was Chris Aberdeen, Mark Peters and Marco de Santos. Through the Continental S's for the last time, and Foss and de Villiers were working in tandem to hold off Sean van der Linde, who was now into last-ditch territory. The Honda hairpin and Goodyear corner were the last potential overtaking areas for van der Linde. His major problem was that Foss and de Villiers were fully aware of that fact. Not that Foss and de Villiers were without worries of their own. The last thing the pair wanted to do was to take each other out, and van der Linde was making a last-ditch stand to try and force a costly error from one of the 2 Nissan drivers. Further back, there was last lap pressure for Chris Aberdeen, with Mark Peters, the man, trying to force his way past the Works engine Audi, which was now running in 6th place. Out of Goodyear corner for the last time, and van der Linde, it was all over for him. Father shouting. The two Nissan Primeras crossed the line almost side by side, with van der Linde in their wake, and the second Sasol BMW of Mike Briggs a further 4 seconds in arrears.
3 wins in 4 races for the BP Nissan team, and Duncan Foss's first victory of the 1998 campaign. The Sasol BMW team will be happy with much improved results in round 4, with Terry Moss and Chris Aberdeen also among the points. The traditional bubbly celebrations and a very happy Duncan Foss.
Tyres is a major factor here, so we had to control the pace. Sean was really putting a lot of pressure on me, so I was getting instructions on how fast I could really go, but not giving Sean too much, not allowing him too much hope to really think that I was struggling, but it was marginal all the way.
Janelle de Villiers stretches his lead at the top of the championship table, with teammate Duncan Foss in 2nd place. Consistency has had its rewards for Terry Moss, with Sean van der Linde and Chris Aberdeen 4th and 5th on the points log. A delighted BP Nissan Motorsport manager Glyn Hall accepts another manufacturer's trophy with Nissan, with the team stretching away from Audi, BMW and Toyota in the Manufacturers' Championship.